I think like physical exercise, now more than ever, people are becoming more aware that, hey, if I don't work out, if I am sedentary, if I eat a lot of bad foods, I'm going to develop heart disease or diabetes. And the one thing that I try to encourage my clients to consider is, just like you work your physical body out, what's wrong with working out your emotions, right? Because if you don't work them out, they stay inside. They've got to get out some way. So to your point, crying, talking, people can go to a gym, right, to work out and take care of their physical wellness. But they have to be very intentional about going to see a therapist. How do we help people understand that just like they work out their physical body, that it's okay to work out their emotional wellness and also maybe their mental health as well, without feeling like they're crazy?
Right. Well, it takes a lot of education to get people to that place to accept that. There's a researcher, his name is James Prochaska, and he had done work back in like the 70s and 80s, and he wrote a book called Changing for Good. Right? And he studied or helped implement things like people wearing seatbelts, people wearing sunscreen, right? And what he discovered was, even though we may identify a problem, we're not always ready to act on it, right, in that action phase. So he's one of the few people who said that there's steps before the action phase that we need to address to get people to move to the action phase. And the very first one is education, right? Public service messages, different ways that people kind of start to get the idea. Because first they're in, either they don't know or they're in denial, right? Then once they acknowledge it, that's a step, but it's still not action. So it's a lot of work to get from here to there. But education is really the only way to do that. Things like this video that show different sides of therapy and different people's thoughts and opinions starts to educate people about sort of what's possible that they may have never considered before.
I think we're in a time where there's a lot of mental health awareness that is being brought about, and we can take advantage of that by doing innovative things outside of individuals coming to the office to do therapy. It's about us doing outreach and education ourselves, going to the churches, holding a workshop in a barbershop, or going to the synagogue, going where people are. I think we can take a page from public health and to try and educate people in terms of how they think, they feel, and act, and how they work together to show, behavior, and what signs and symptoms to look for in mental illness, so that, I'm not crazy, I'm just experiencing an episode, but I'm not fully depressed.
You hit the nail on the head about going to people where they are, because I think a relevant point, I was watching recently the movie Lights Out, a horror film. Thanks to my goddaughter, she twisted my arm to go check out this horror film. I hate horror films.
Me too.
But I went anyway, and spoiler alert, there is a main character who has mental illness. And there's a line where she says, I don't want to go talk to a stranger about my problems. And so I think the idea of going to a place to meet someone I don't know, to talk to me about my private issues, I think regardless of ethnicity, most people feel very uncomfortable with that idea. Although you do meet those people who will start talking to you about their problems, and you're like, lady, who are you?
Right.
But I love that idea of going to where people are and demystifying the idea of counseling and therapy and supporting people in ways that they can relate to.
Simple things like having a mental health workshop, mental health 101 workshop, what signs, what symptoms to look for can be done in and throughout the community to spread awareness, to educate people, to break the stigma of mental health, to further advance this notion of psychological resiliency, to counter that pressure that people are feeling, and actually, in addition to that, build levels of trust. Not only just with mental health professionals, but just creating more awareness as well, with different practitioners, different aspects of society, be it legal, clergy, building that sense of community That's key.
And this is where technology can really come in handy too. Because you can set up a virtual classroom and have 1,000 people show up on their phone, on their laptop, and so they don't have to make the full commitment to get somewhere, but you can start to expose them to those ideas.
Absolutely.
Right? Where they could listen into the conversation, they can be given the microphone. You've been to virtual classrooms, right, like at universities, where you can turn on a microphone or turn on a camera, so you can either be in the spotlight or you can sit as far back as you want and still get a chance to even listen, even if you don't participate. It has to be that tiny little step to open the door, to create that little possibility that they'll hear a slightly new message.
And I think helping people, and maybe you two can just share some brief recommendations on how to help people overcome stigmas with getting help or approaching therapy. Even if they were doing it privately on their phone, there's still this idea, if my family found out. I know within the Latino community, we know now that Latinos make up 51% of the population in California. And so based on some research that I've been doing, one of the barriers to being able to get support for Latinos, language barrier. Also, feeling like, what is my family going to think of me? So I don't know if you two can speak to how to help people overcome some of those biases, even once they've been educated. How do I overcome what people will think of me to get help?
That's a really difficult problem, because the cultural pressure is so strong, right, to not shame or embarrass the family, right? How much you really are allowed to air your dirty laundry, right? It's just people, most cultures are not very comfortable with that at all, right? Everything needs to be handled within the family. I wish I had a good answer for that, because that is such a powerful influence.
Yeah.
Well, I think it starts with us as practitioners or mental health providers to first be aware and educate ourselves about those nuances that take place within each cultural context, and then catering our interventions and practices to that particular segment of the population. That way we get a foot in the door, a way in, so that it demystifies what mental health is all about. I'm going to see somebody and I don't want anybody in my business. I'm not crazy. Those notions can be dispelled, because everybody needs someone to talk to if it's framed in a manner that's conducive to uplifting and building a person up.
Yeah, absolutely. To your point, this is a little portion of the dissertation from a new practitioner. Her name is Dr. Joanne M. Barba. She's a Latina, and actually her dissertation is about the stigma and barriers attached to seeking mental health services among Hispanics and Latinos, or that population. And the very thing that you said, Dr. Lang, was if more Latinos become practitioners, right? Like you said, someone seeing you as a young African-American boy or girl, like, wow, I could do that. And so I think probably people might feel more comfortable talking to someone that looks like them, even if once they get in there, they might realize this person doesn't relate to me. But at least that could help sort of that barrier to entry. And some of the findings that she discusses in her dissertation are about taking advantage of this huge opportunity to reach out to a large population, the majority of our population, that needs mental health services.